My name is Sable Elodie Tran, 29 years old. The first insult wasn't a word. It was a look. Adrian scrolled through Bali photos under the kitchen pendant light, the screen washing his face in other people's sunsets. This, he said, pushing the phone toward me, is what real couples do. Infinity pools blinking like eyes, private villas framed by palms, candlelit dinners at water's edge. The algorithm had decided everyone we knew was in a caftan on a cliff. We were not. We went to the coast last month, I said, rinsing coffee grounds from the French press. The cabin? The one with the trail down to the tide pools? I could still feel the cold shock of ankle-deep water, the way we laughed when a wave chased us back to shore. He didn't look up. A cabin with no AC is poverty tourism. That word hung, sharp and ridiculous, between the refrigerator hum and my heartbeat. I made $52,000 a year in IT support. Decent, predictable, the kind of income that keeps the lights on and the pings off the help desk queue. We'd been together 3 years, living together for 1. I cooked on Sundays, he did laundry on Wednesdays. We split rent, and somewhere in the middle we forgot to talk about the future unless it was about airline miles. The envy didn't start with Bali. It started with Noelle from Adrian's department returning with a tan that looked sponsored and captions like gratitude and glow. After that, our feed became a parade. Santorini stairs, Dubai skylines, Maldives bungalows like pearls on a string. When I suggested we save for something bigger next year, he laughed without humor. Sable, you're 29. If you have to save for a vacation, you're doing something wrong with your life. I set the mug down too carefully. I make decent money. You're too broke to take me on real vacations, he said, slicing the sentence cleanly, as if precision made it true. I stared at him for a long heartbeat. You're right. He blinked. What? You're absolutely right, I said, voice even. For what you want, I'm too broke. Victory flashed across his face, a small, mean triumph that made me feel like I'd just handed him a trophy for spotting me in a crowd. What he didn't know, I'd been stashing $200 a month into a line in my budget I called surprise. It wasn't for me, it was for us. A week in Costa Rica, I'd planned to spring for our anniversary. Flights, modest hotel, money for zip lines and plantains, and the kind of Instagram he could brag about without choking on his pride. The fund sat at $2,400, round numbers bright and obedient in the spreadsheet. That night, I opened my laptop and moved the money. The trading course didn't look like a vacation. No turquoise water, no hammock, just a landing page with testimonials and a $1,800 premium package line item that felt like both a risk and a dare. I clicked enroll. The remaining $600 went into a brand new brokerage account, a tiny ship I would try to sail across a fickle sea. In the morning, Adrian noticed the missing line in the budget. Where'd the vacation money go? He held the spreadsheet open like evidence. Invested it, I said. In what? Crypto? He winced like he'd caught me shoplifting at a gas station. Education, I said. Market mechanics. Risk management. He snorted. You spent our vacation money on a scam. On a skill, I corrected. He shook his head, grinning at the ceiling like the joke lived there. You're adorable. That's when Broke Girl was born, said lightly in front of his friends, tacked onto questions. Can Broke Girl afford the wine tasting? Is Broke Girl coming to dinner, or is it not in Broke Girl's budget? He said it like a pet name, and everyone laughed like I'd chosen it. Nights I sat at the kitchen table with candlesticks and moving averages, while he scrolled reels of strangers eating mango on sunbeds. I started with paper trading and lost pretend fortunes. I watched myself get greedy, then disciplined. I learned position sizing, stop losses, the safety built into the word no. The course wasn't magic, it was a mirror. I took notes until the ink bled and my neck ached. The first time I put $50 of real money on the line, my fingers shook. Mom thinks you're depressed, Adrian announced one evening, thumb flicking through his messages. I'm fine. She says I should date someone more ambitious, like Nate. Nate just made senior at the firm. He watched my face. He took Kara to Tulum for her birthday. I kept my eyes on my chart. Your ex? We're friends. Kara had started popping up in his notifications. Pilates videos, sun-soaked selfies, the kind of performative gratitude that made other people feel like they were failing. They had history. History has gravity. Month 2. My $600 hovered, dipped, climbed. Month 3. I was green more days than not. Adrian called my study nights playing pretend investor and told his sister I was going through a hustle phase. I consumed lectures on risk of ruin like scripture. I failed safely, adjusted, failed again, and each time the cliff felt a little less high. Everyone's going to Greece, Adrian sighed one Saturday, scrolling. We're going to the laundromat. I like clean socks, I said. Broke girl humor. Cute. At work, I fixed a director's VPN with 2 keystrokes and thought, I can do hard things. In the break room, an older admin named May watched me parse an options flow thread on my phone and said, whatever you're building, make sure it's yours when you're done. By month 6, the tiny ship had wind. I'd turned $600, $4,000, not by luck, but by getting comfortable being boring. Smaller winners, smaller losers, the math that keeps you in the game. Adrian's contempt evolved. Stephanie's engaged, he said, shoving a 1.5 carat oval into my face via Instagram. Cabo destination wedding. Her fiancé does real estate, real money. Nice, I said, and meant it. Someone else's ring doesn't steal light from your house unless you hand them the switch. He waited for me to flinch. When I didn't, he pushed harder. At 27, I can't waste my prime years while you pretend to be Warren Buffett on your lunch break. I'm happy with my job. Then I'm done waiting. He set his fork down, softly, like we were in a restaurant with a dress code. Either you book us a real vacation by next month, 5 stars, tropical, minimum 1 week, or I'm moving back to my mom's. That's about $5,000, I said. So use a credit card like a normal person. Everyone has debt. I'm not going into debt for a vacation. Tears stood in his eyes, bright with anger. You're pathetic, he said, almost tenderly. I have given you 3 years, and you can't give me 1 week in paradise. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, and hated how the sentence sounded like human resources. I'm staying at Nate's, he announced, already grabbing his bag. Think about what you want, Sable. Me or your little fantasy of being a traitor. After the door clicked, the apartment felt like an elevator between floors. Suspended, humming, nowhere. I washed the single plate he'd left and opened my laptop. The SPY setup was clean. Compression into Friday, catalyst risk mapped, $500, potential loss, boxed neatly under my cursor, $2,000, upside if momentum carried. I sized small and took the trade, then set my stop and walked away to fold the laundry he'd left piled on the couch. It wasn't bravery, it was process. 2 days later, he returned with a truck and Kara leaning in the passenger seat, ponytail high, sunglasses expensive. She didn't get out. He packed in trips, efficient, eyes on the floor. You did this to yourself, he said at the door with the last box. To do what? I asked. Spend money I don't have? To be a real woman who provides, he snapped, then seemed to hear himself. You know what I mean. Do I? Kara's taking me to Scottsdale next weekend, he said. Just because. Tell Scottsdale I said hi. He stared for a beat like I'd missed my cue. You're going to be 40 and alone, still pretending at that computer. Maybe, I said. Guess we'll see. He left. The apartment exhaled. The chart dinged. In the quiet, I realized what I'd just done wasn't revenge. It was a line. Later that night, as I journaled my trade, I wrote a single sentence in the margin and drew a box around it. If he measures love by receipts, no vacation will ever be long enough. I underlined ever until the paper almost tore. The next morning, the apartment acted normal out of habit. The kettle whistled. Sun climbed the brick across the alley. The neighbor practiced scales on a trumpet like Hope with bad timing. I made oatmeal, checked pre-market, and pretended my chest didn't feel like it had been hollowed with a spoon. Adrian's text arrived at 8:03 a.m. Decision? No greeting. No question mark. I watched the bubbles appear, disappear, reappear. Nate says Turks is cheaper in shoulder season. I typed nothing, then everything, then backspaced, until there was only silence blinking where my boundary had been. At 9:30, the market opened like a curtain. My SPY calls caught a clean impulse and filled partials at my first target. By lunch, the last runner stopped out green. But $1,150. Not life-changing, but honest money, earned, with patience no one could see. When I told May in the break room, she nodded at my Tupperware of reheated lentils. Discipline tastes like this first. Eventually, you season it. That evening, Adrian came home with his jaw set and a printout of five-star resorts. Pick, he said, fanning them like cards. We'll put it on my credit card if yours can't handle it. I'm not going into debt for a week of photos, I said. It's not photos, he snapped. It's proof. Of what? That we're not failing, he said, quieter. The words landed truer than he meant them to. That we're not stuck. I set the resorts aside. Being unstuck isn't about location. He laughed once, sharp. God, you sound like a TED Talk. I sound like someone who pays for the life she lives. He looked past me toward the kitchen table, charts open like windows, notes layered with highlighter, the neatness of a mind trying to make order out of noise. You really think those little graphs are a future? I think they're a skill. He exhaled like surrender cost him breath. 30 days, he said. Tropical, 5-star, or I'm gone. The timer started whether I wanted it to or not. The 30 days weren't cinematic. They were unglamorous and granular. I woke at 6, reviewed levels, set alerts, worked my day job, took only A setups, journaled the rest. I added to winners, cut losers without bargaining. I cooked at home, canceled 2 subscriptions, rode my bike to work when the weather allowed, answered friends with next time without explaining why. I was gentle with my body and harsh with my risk. The account crept, $600 to $4,000 by month 6, the kind of progress that doesn't impress anyone who hasn't ever stared down their own sabotage. Adrian's contempt didn't creep, it sprinted. He started practicing speeches in the mirror, pep talks to himself disguised as criticism of me. Stephanie's fiancé just comped them a suite, he muttered, while brushing his teeth. Real providers handle things. In public, broke girl evolved into a punchline with an audience. At his cousin's birthday, he announced, Sable can't do cocktails, she's investing in pretend money. Laughter scattered like rice at a wedding that wasn't mine. I smiled tightly and drank water, imagining stop losses for my dignity. 2 weeks before his deadline, he arrived with an overnight bag and a grin stretched too wide. Good news, he said. You only need to book 5 nights. We'll stay at Kara's friend's place the first 2. She knows someone in hospitality. The name dropped like a coin into a jar I hadn't realized he'd been filling. Kara, I said evenly. Your ex. He shrugged. We're friends. Friends who had conveniently reappeared at the exact moment I refused to foot the bill for his elegant proof of life. My mouth tasted like pennies. We're not going, I said. He stared at me, eyes skimming my face like he could find a compromise hidden under my cheekbone. You're really choosing your hobby over us. I'm choosing not to finance a performance. We didn't fight. We calcified. He slept at Nate's more nights than not. He left earbuds and little altars around the apartment, the way men do when they want you to remember they exist. I kept moving quietly through the routine we'd built, peeling my hope out of the corners like stickers I no longer wanted on the furniture. On day 31, he didn't knock. He texted, truck at 6. At 6:07, the knock came anyway. I opened the door to Kara in mirrored sunglasses, ponytail whipped high, leggings like second skin. She stayed in the cab. Adrian didn't meet my eyes as he carried his life out in boxes that looked lighter than they should. You brought your ex to move you out? I asked finally. I needed a truck, he said, which wasn't an answer. On his last trip, he stood in the doorway, cradling a plant he'd forgotten to water for months. You did this, he said, as if narration could make it true. I gave you so many chances to be a real adult. To do what? Carry debt like a personality? My voice surprised me with how calm it was. If your measure of adulthood is credit limits, I'll keep my childhood. He gripped the frame like it could absolve him. Kara and I are going to Scottsdale next weekend, he said, trying on Triumph like a new shirt. Just because. Enjoy the dry heat, I said. His mouth twisted. You're going to be 40 and alone, Sable, still staring at those screens like a gambler at a slot machine. Maybe, I said, but if I am, I'll be alone on purpose. He left. I stared at the empty space he used to take up and felt not victory, not even relief. Something quieter, like a room remembering the first sound it ever made. That night, the SPY setup I'd prepped for triggered exactly where I thought it would. I risked $500 and managed the position like someone who respected tomorrow. When I closed the laptop, the apartment was finally the size of my breath. The market rewarded boredom. Mine became a practice. 8 months in, my win rate was still under 60%, but my average win was larger than my average loss, which is the whole trick dressed in plain clothes. By the 1 year mark, my account kissed $47,000 and hummed there like a secret frequency only I could hear. I kept my job. Why wouldn't I? Stability funds risk. It doesn't diminish it. I maxed my 401k, cooked beans 3 ways, fixed the stovetop burner with a YouTube video and a screwdriver that belonged to a life where I asked for less. I stopped checking Adrian's feed. I didn't need the secondhand smoke of other people's curated joy. Still, news floated in through mutual friends the way smell. Wafts from a neighbor's kitchen. Involuntary, specific. Scottsdale had been his buddy's place and split meals. The infinity pool was a community lap lane with rules posted about hats. Kara's captions softened into the kind of grayscale you can't filter back into color. It didn't make me happy. It made me uninterested. What did interest me was a biotech I'd been tracking for months. The cup and handle structure built slowly like a shy decision. Volume dried up on the pullback like tide on a good beach day. The catalyst calendar was clean. The risk was tight. I planned the trade on paper, sized conservative, even though I wanted to be reckless because I'd earned the right to be. When price flagged under resistance, I placed $10,000 with a stop so tight I could see its breath. It triggered on a Tuesday. By Thursday, news hit. By Friday, the chart looked like a diagonal astonishment. I took partials like a grown-up and let the last runner live. 10K, 30K. The account crossed 70,000. I did not cry. I did the dishes. Then I sat on the floor and laughed into my hands, not because of the number, but because the girl who had once apologized for wanting something measurable had built a machine that respected her. The next weekend, I walked into a Tesla showroom and let a salesperson named Armand talk to me like this was ordinary. Financing? He asked, fingers poised above the keyboard. Cash, I said, and writing the check felt like returning something I hadn't realized had been borrowed from me. I drove the Model 3 home on streets that hadn't changed. I changed. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the black screen and didn't look away. 2 weeks later, I was at Whole Foods calculating unit prices on chickpeas when my name hit the air like a pebble on glass. Sable? I turned. Adrian held a basket of curated greens and the brittle confidence of someone who believes in second chances only when they benefit him. His eyes fell to the key fob in my hand like it was a plot twist. Is that... you got a new car? Last month, I said. A Tesla, he said, awe and accusation braided together. You get a promotion? Nope, same job. He blinked. Then how? I tilted my head toward the invisible charts that still lived at my kitchen table. Turns out those little graphs are a future. He laughed lightly, as if we were sharing a joke about our own foolishness. Huh. Guess you made some money. Some, I said. How much is some? He stepped closer. The produce mist hissed. Tiny rain on a curated jungle. We should catch up. Coffee? Dinner? He glanced at my basket. That new sushi place downtown. They say it's $200 a person, but you can afford it now, right? The moment I'd scripted in my darkest nights arrived on schedule. His voice softened into memory. I miss us, he said. We were good. We were something, I said. He reached for my arm, then thought better of it. I was harsh about the money. I was frustrated. I see now there are more important things than vacations. Like Teslas? I asked. He smiled, wounded. Like someone stable, smart, someone who has their life together. I can afford it, I said, but I'm not interested. His smile cracked. You seeing someone? No, I said, just not interested in going backward. Backward? He swallowed. I'm trying to apologize. No, I said gently. You're trying to get back what you walked away from because it looks shinier now. Color climbed his neck. I'm not shallow. You called me broke girl for 8 months, I said softly. You brought Kara to move you out. You told me I'd die alone at 40 still pretending to be a traitor. I was angry, he said. Exactly, I said. People say what they really think when they're sure they can get away with it. His jaw worked. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said. Guess we'll see. I paid for my chickpeas and walked out to a car I didn't need to explain. In the reflection of the automatic doors, I saw him still standing there, small in a way I hadn't wished for. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like closing a door and finding the room beyond it was finally mine. That night, 2 DMs arrived. One from Kara, a paragraph about fake nice girls who get lucky once and think they're wolves, vague enough to be deniable, specific enough to be obvious. One from Adrian. Hey, any tips for getting started? Followed by a flexed bicep emoji and an offer to trade knowledge for gym sessions. I blocked them both and set a new alert. Silence. Noise. When the screen dimmed, the apartment breathed with me. For the first time in a long time, the only voice left in my head sounded like mine. 3 months after that grocery store encounter, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Hey, Sable, I think I owe you an apology. I didn't need to ask who it was. Some mistakes have their own ringtone. I deleted the message without opening it. But later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it from the trash folder. I wasn't in a good place before. Kara and I are over. I've been thinking about how unfair I was to you. Maybe we could talk. Grab coffee. No expectations. The words "no expectations" from Adrian felt like a magician promising to show you the trick this time. I didn't respond. By the end of the week, there was another text. Longer this time. I saw an article about women in finance, about how men underestimate them. Reminded me of you. You were ahead of me, and I was too proud to see it. That line might have worked on the version of me who still explained herself to people who had already decided not to listen. But that version was gone. I didn't answer that message either. By then, life had settled into something I hadn't experienced before. Quiet success. My trading account hovered around $90,000. Steady, boring, consistent. The way real wealth grows. I still worked my 9 to 5, still packed my own lunches, still rode my bike to save gas. It wasn't deprivation anymore. It was control. Every time I reviewed my trades, I saw a pattern I hadn't planned for. The better my boundaries got, the cleaner my entries became. Trading wasn't just numbers. It was psychology. The market rewards the same things life does. Patience, discipline, walking away when the setup isn't right. It was strange, realizing that I had learned more about relationships from candles and trend lines than I ever had from a man. A few weeks later, I got a call from a number labeled private. I almost didn't pick up. Hello? Hi, Sable. This is Adrian's mom. I hadn't heard that voice in 2 years. Always sugary, like she was trying to sell politeness at a discount. Mrs. Langford, I said cautiously. I just wanted to talk, she began too quickly. Adrian told me everything. He said he saw you recently, and I wanted to thank you. For what? For forgiving him. I blinked. I didn't forgive him. There was a small silence on her end, then a brittle laugh. Well, he's trying, you know. He's working on himself. He told me he's been in therapy, and I think deep down you two still... Mrs. Langford, I interrupted softly. He's lying to you. The pause this time was heavier. You don't have to be cruel, dear. I'm not, I said. I just finally learned the difference between kindness and permission. She exhaled through her teeth, the way people do when you stop playing their favorite song halfway through. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else. I smiled. Not smarter, just finally listening to myself. She hung up. 2 days later, I got another DM, this time from Kara. I almost admired the symmetry of it all. You win. Happy? He's miserable now. You ruined him. I hope it feels good. I didn't respond to her either, but I thought about it. About how people like Adrian and Kara always needed someone to play villain in their redemption stories. About how they'd rewrite the past just to stay the heroes of their own script. But what if there was no villain? What if the story was simply over? That thought alone felt like freedom. Months passed. My portfolio crossed 6 figures. I stopped counting. I stopped needing to. One night, I scrolled through old folders and found a document labeled Costa Rica Trip, DAX-LS. The file that had started all of this. I opened it. The spreadsheet was still there. Flight costs, hotel names, activity estimates. In the notes column, my younger self had written, "Surprise him with a sunrise tour. He loves mornings." I stared at that line for a long time. It hurt in a quiet way, not because I missed him, but because I mourned the version of me who believed effort could earn appreciation. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just change how you see them. It changes how you see yourself. But then I scrolled to the bottom, where my old self had written one final formula. Sum all the sacrifices that were worth it. The cell was blank. I smiled and closed the file. Maybe the sum wasn't meant to be calculated. Maybe it was meant to be lived. By the end of the year, I took the trip anyway. Alone. Not the 5-star version he had wanted. No infinity pools. No champagne breakfasts. Just a small villa by the rainforest. the smell of salt and wet earth, the hum of cicadas that didn't care who I was or how much I made. I watched the sunrise every morning, not because it was romantic, but because it reminded me that consistency beats intensity every time. And somewhere between the mountains and the sea, I realized I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I was just living a life that couldn't be weaponized against me. When I returned home, I checked my messages. None from Adrian, none from Kara. Just one from May, the older admin from work who'd seen me through the worst of it. Proud of you, kid. Whatever you're building, it's yours now. She was right. Everything I had, every dollar, every scar, every quiet morning that felt like peace, was mine. Not because I'd beaten anyone, because I'd finally stopped trying to prove I could. A year after that trip, life no longer felt like a story about loss. It felt like a story about design. My alarm still rang at 6:30 a.m. I still worked the same IT job, same desk, same coworkers who thought my trading thing was just a side hustle. I didn't bother correcting them. The truth wasn't a secret. It was just mine. My account was sitting at $130,000, but that number didn't feel like the climax anymore. It was just a measure of consistency, the quiet math of choosing yourself over and over again. I wasn't chasing freedom now. I was maintaining it. One Friday evening, I met someone new. His name was Julian. We collided in the most unremarkable way possible, both reaching for the same book at a downtown bookstore, Atomic Habits. We laughed, and he offered to let me buy it first, but I already owned a copy. I told him I underlined the chapter on identity, so much the page looked bruised. That made him smile. Then I owe you coffee, to recover from that emotional damage. It wasn't a line. It was sincerity with a wink, the kind of honesty that didn't ask for an audience. Julian was a high school teacher. Modest salary, soft hands from chalk dust instead of calluses. When I told him I traded stocks, he nodded. Cool, he said. I do crossword puzzles. No follow-up questions, no skepticism, just balance. That was new. He didn't care about numbers. He cared about people, about purpose. He didn't talk about making it. He talked about making it matter. It wasn't glamorous. It was safe. And I didn't realize how much I missed safe until it stopped feeling boring. On our third date, I told him everything. Not the polished version, the raw one. The part where I'd been called broke girl, where I'd burned through vacation dreams and pride and tears to rebuild something that finally felt like mine. Julian didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. When I finished, he just said, "That sounds exhausting." It was. He nodded. Are you over it? I thought for a long moment. I'm through it. That's not the same thing. He smiled. Through is better. We started small. Movie nights with burned popcorn. Late walks when the city felt quieter. I didn't tell him how scared I was, that my body still braced for betrayal like muscle memory, that every text I didn't get triggered a phantom echo of waiting. But he seemed to know anyway. He was the kind of person who noticed patterns, like when I double-checked receipts or refused to link my card to food delivery apps. One night I apologized for being paranoid. He shrugged. Everyone who's been burned checks the stove twice. That simple kindness cracked something open inside me. It wasn't that I started trusting again. It was that I stopped apologizing for how I healed. A year into our relationship, we went camping. A real one. A rented cabin. No AC, wood stove, stars like salt spilled over black velvet. This is perfect, Julian said, tossing another log into the fire. Adrian's voice, that old sneering ghost, whispered in my head, a cabin with no AC is poverty tourism. I looked around at the warmth, the laughter, the cheap wine, the soft snore of the old golden retriever in the corner. And for the first time, I smiled at the memory instead of wincing. Because he was wrong. Poverty wasn't simplicity. Poverty was emptiness dressed up as luxury. This, the smoke in my hair, the cheap blankets, the uncurated joy, this was wealth. That night, Julian fell asleep first. I stayed up listening to the wind move through the trees and realized I'd spent years learning charts that predicted risk, but not once had I mapped my own peace. So I started. I made a list in my journal, not of goals, but of boundaries. I will never again confuse loud for passionate. I will never mistake comfort for control, and I will never, ever measure my worth in what I can buy someone else. I closed the journal and whispered it once out loud, like a promise. 2 years later, we went to Costa Rica. The same trip I'd once planned to surprise Adrian with. Only this time there was no pretense. We stayed in a small bungalow by the beach. No infinity pools, no 5-star menus, no content. Just us, hammocks, mango slices, and waves that sounded like forgiveness. I spent one of those mornings watching the sunrise, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, and it hit me how poetic the symmetry was. I'd spent years thinking success was the view, that I had to reach some visible proof of achievement before I could rest. But the truth was simpler. Freedom wasn't the view, it was the ability to choose where to stand. A few months after that trip, I got an automated email. Case status closed, restitution complete. 5 words that meant I was finally, officially, disconnected from Adrian forever. I stared at the screen for a moment, then closed the laptop. That chapter didn't need a reaction. It just needed silence. That evening, Julian came home carrying groceries and a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Early anniversary gift," he said, placing it in my hands. Inside was a watch. Simple, elegant, silver. "Why a watch?" I asked. "Because you're always telling me time is the best investment." I laughed. "That's not exactly what I meant." He smiled. "I know, but you earned every second of the life you have now. Might as well keep track of it." The watch glimmered under the kitchen light, its hands ticking softly. For a second, I thought of the Patek Philippe my ex had stolen years ago, the one that symbolized everything fake about his version of success. Now here I was, holding a timepiece that meant the opposite. Not stolen, not flashy, just real. That night, I sat on our porch while Julian made dinner and watched the sun disappear behind the skyline. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who'd whispered, "You're right, I am too broke." The one who'd traded her vacation fund for a chance at self-respect. The one who'd been laughed at, doubted, dismissed. I wanted to tell her thank you, because she had no idea she was buying her future that day. The course, the risks, the sleepless nights, they weren't about money. They were about ownership. Of her choices, of her voice, of her worth. And as the first star flickered to life, I realized something I'd been too proud to admit before. Adrian hadn't ruined me. He'd revealed me. I wasn't the broke girl he left. I was the woman who built herself from the dust of his leaving. The market taught me that sometimes the best trade isn't chasing gains, it's cutting losses early. He was the loss, and I was the profit. When Julian joined me outside, he slipped his arm around my shoulders. "Everything okay?" I looked at him, this man who didn't need proof, who didn't keep score, who never asked me to earn my peace. "Everything's perfect," I said. And for once, it wasn't an affirmation. It was the truth. Because the best revenge wasn't the Tesla or the money or the Costa Rica sunrise. It was this, a quiet life built from my own decisions. A life I didn't have to explain. A life I chose.